So good morning, everyone, and welcome to Township Tuesday. Uh, I had thought today we're going to do a little bit of an update on a topic that was fairly popular from last year because we had a fairly important case come down from the Supreme Court recently. And this is about social media and the First Amendment and its implications potentially for township officers. So the case was Linke versus Freed, and it was handed down fairly recently by the United States Supreme Court. And I think it's got some pretty interesting implications for township officers. I would characterize it as largely good news for us, but that's sort of putting the cart ahead of the horse here. So let's just kind of walk through it here. So we'll start with the factual background. And we will begin with our two main characters here. So James Freed was the defendant in this case, and he, like many people, started a Facebook post or a Facebook page when he was in college, around about 2008. And he was a pretty prolific poster. He was one of those folks who seems to collect friends pretty aggressively. They characterized him as pretty quickly reaching the 5,000 person limit on a page. I didn't know that there was a 5,000 person limit, but apparently there is. Anyway, he converts his page from a page into or from a profile into a page. During that process, he says, "I am a public figure." He sort of makes that positive representation to Facebook. That's something that's visible to folks who take a look at his page at that point. And this is something that's sort of happening independently of his career. But meanwhile, his career is sort of careening on ahead, as sometimes they do. And in about 2014, he was appointed the city manager of a city in Michigan, Port Huron specifically. So this is him. This is his kind of official Port Huron page. And so he sort of continues along at a pace. He continues to post mostly personal stuff, photos of his dog, photos of his daughter, photos of family nature walks, that kind of stuff, Bible verses. He threw those up there occasionally. But he also posted about his job. Now, most of that stuff was fairly low key. We're reconstructing a boat launch. We're highlighting communications from other city officials, but he's also soliciting and receiving feedback from the public. So he's putting out polls. He's asking for the public's opinions on matters of public concern, which is potentially a pretty big deal, but we'll get into that a little bit once we get into the legal background here. Now, our other character is Kevin Linke, and he is a citizen, and he's mad. He's upset, particularly in this case, about the city's handling of the pandemic, and he came to Freed's Facebook page to say so in pretty aggressive terms. Abysmal. There was, swearing, that kind of stuff. He was, your classic gadfly. So naturally enough, Freed does the normal thing, and he kicks this guy off of his page. He deletes the comments, and then he blocks the guy. Okay, why are we talking about this? Well, there is this thing out there called 1983, Section 1983. What the citation is 42 United States Code 1983, and it provides an individual with the right to sue a state government for violating their civil rights. So it doesn't create any new rights, but it does provide a mechanism by which you can enforce existing rights. And in this case, Linke's arguing that Freed violated his First Amendment right. Now, going back to our First Amendment basics here, so the basic rule comes from this text: Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Those 6 words incorporated against us through the 14th Amendment sort of provide the baseline. Now, this protects, as we've talked about from time to time in the past, both locations and content. So in this case, Linke argued that Freed had created a public forum by talking about public business and soliciting input from citizens. That is, he had done the equivalent of creating a new town square, which is one of the most protected places in American law in this context. He further argued that Freed engaged in viewpoint discrimination by deleting his comments and blocking him because he didn't like what he had to say. One touchstone of the First Amendment is that you can regulate on the basis of the effects of speech, sort of the neutral sort of things. But particularly in public fora, you have to be very careful not to regulate on content. That is, I can say you can't protest with a bullhorn out in front of an apartment building at 3 o'clock in the morning. But I can't say you can't protest, right? The point has to be about protecting not the content of the speech, but sort of the secondary effects of the speech. People can't sleep because you're too noisy. They have a legitimate interest in sleeping. This is all fairly complicated, but this is sort of a 10,000-foot picture here. So the Supreme Court kind of starts to wrestle with this issue. Now, we've got some selected quotations from the opinion up on your screen now. And I think they're fairly representative of sort of the way the Supreme Court started walking through this issue. Section 1983 provides a cause of action against every person who, under color of any statute, ordinance, regulation, custom, or usage of any state, deprives someone of a federal, constitutional, or statutory right. So you have to be some kind of state official before you even get into it. This is the way the Supreme Court says it. As the text makes clear, this provision protects against acts attributable to the state, not those of a private person. Thus, if Freed acted in his private capacity when he blocked Linke and deleted his comments, he did not violate Linke's First Amendment rights. He instead exercised his own First Amendment rights. But how do you tell the difference between a public action and a private action in a case like this, right? A lot of times it's pretty easy, of course, if somebody's in an Army uniform and acting as an official representative of the United States Army. Great, that's a pretty clear example of a public action. That'd be federal, I suppose, not state, but a police officer or a state trooper acting in uniform and stopping someone is using the powers given to them on account of the fact that they're an agent of the state and a special class of agent at that, or a teacher in a classroom. That's somebody who's very clearly acting on behalf of the state as an agent of the state, stuff like that. But of course, public officials do not lose all of their rights just because they took a job, and public officials are not always on the clock. So the quote that the Supreme Court used is there. Parties can act with the authority of the state, and private parties can act with the authority of the state, and state officials have private lives of their own and their own constitutional right. Categorizing conduct, therefore, can require a close look. Now, this was with respect to rejecting the argument that you don't have to get into this. This guy is an official of the city of Port Huron, therefore his actions are official actions. That was one of the arguments that Linke raised, and the court rejected that one pretty roundly. And then they sort of start working through some hypothetical examples as a way to kind of get at some general principles here. So I'm sort of curious what the group thinks if folks are in a mood to talk here. So we have the example of a school board president who announces that the board has lifted pandemic restrictions. Does anybody feel like that's an official action, a private action, or would you want more information? Anybody willing to sing out? Okay, fair enough. Well, the court took the position that this one sort of required a little bit more information. On the one hand, if he's making this announcement at a barbecue in his backyard, they said that was clearly private conduct. Even though he is a school board president, he would have the authority to make such an announcement. The context makes it clear that this is him acting in his private capacity, backyard barbecue, just friends around. So that would be private speech. However, if he makes this same announcement at a duly constituted school board meeting, clearly an official announcement. Now they go through what is, I think, a closer hypothetical. We got a chat. Heather thinks public. Yep. So certainly it can be. The other sort of big hypothetical that they kind of work their way through is so a mayor gets on his Facebook page and says, I am suspending, pursuant to the city code, I am suspending enforcement of alternate side parking regulations. And they took the view that this one depended on context too. If it was only available there, if the mayor cited specifically to the city code and said, I am exercising this power in this way, that would probably be an official action. However, if the mayor simply, here's my personal Facebook page, and I am linking to the web page of the city where the announcement really is, that might still be a private action. So you're sort of looking to the context in this sort of reasoning by analogy way to try to figure out which side of this fence you are potentially on. Now, what they ended up coming down at was what they characterized as a two-part test. Public official social media activity constitute a state action for which, so you can potentially violate somebody's rights if you are acting under the color of state law or under the color of local authority, as a township officer can. But if you can answer no to either one of these questions, then you're in a better place if somebody starts to complain. So the public official social media activity constitutes a state action only if the official possessed actual authority to speak on the state's behalf and purported to exercise that authority when they spoke on state social media. So think of the mayor who decides not to announce this through the city's official webpage, but decides to exercise the authority of his office through his personal Facebook page, right? They've got the actual authority to speak on the state's behalf. He has the authority to do this under the city code, and he purported to exercise that authority. So he says outright, I am exercising the authority of my office in the Post. Now, the punchline here, and the reason that I'm bringing this up, is because it has changed our recommendations somewhat, and it's actually made them quite a bit easier to handle, I think. And this is a direct quote from the opinion as well. Had Freed's account carried a label, for example, this is the personal page of James R. Freed, or disclaimer, the views expressed here are strictly my own, he would have been entitled to a heavy, though not irrebuttable, presumption that all of the posts on his page were personal. So if you've got a personal page and you're worried about this stuff, put up that disclaimer. The Supreme Court has given us a nice little, I mean, it's not perfect, of course. They said not irrebuttable, but they've given us a nice little out that will sort of help us in these situations in the future. If you just say, something like, this is a personal page, the views expressed here are my own, then you can cite directly to the Supreme Court case and say, hey, look, court, these are personal actions. I did not violate anybody's First Amendment rights here. This is a personal page. I am not acting with the authority of the state. So I thought that was a nice little bit of good news. Oh, was there another spelling error on there? I apologize. The littles haven't been sleeping well, so I'm a little blind to my own typos. Please forgive me. Yes. So anyway, for those of you who are interested in this topic, and it was one of the more popular topics that I've given talks on, if you're concerned about this, get on your Facebook page right now. If you've got a Twitter or an X account, just get up there and put on that disclaimer. Say this is a personal page. This is these views are only my own and not those of the township or townhip. If you want to be. I got coffee. I'll be better later. Do most townships have a Facebook page? We don't track that. We have been recommending against it before this Supreme Court case, and I think on balance, I probably still do recommend against it because what this one was so this case turned on whether or not James Freed was posting in a personal capacity or whether he's posting in an official capacity. If you have a township Facebook page, you're kind of making that easy for a potential plaintiff in a case like this. Now, there are ways that you can take if you want to do it to manage the risk. Bluntly, this is where the people are now. This is where people get their information. This is where people get their updates. This is where people go to communicate. So it's such a powerful tool that I hesitate to say don't use it at all. But you are potentially putting yourself in a difficult situation if you have an official township Facebook page and you then do sort of the normal thing, and when people start complaining or when they start being unfair or when they start laying into each other or that kind of stuff, if you start deleting comments and blocking folks, you can potentially run afoul of Section 1983 in the First Amendment. This case will offer you protection on your personal page. It's not bulletproof. I would expect there to be quite a bit more litigation about this, but oh, hang on. If we had a township Facebook page, we'd be duplicating our website and creating more work. At this time, we do not have a Facebook page. Some of the responsibility of finding township information should be on the residents, in my mind, if we have that information on our website. I think that's a fair comment, Chris. I also think, look, one of the real advantages that we have as townships is that we get to we get to watch other units of government make the big expensive mistakes, and then we get to just do what the courts tell us. So I think later on we're going to get some clear guidance from the Supreme Court about what happens when you, as a unit of government, decide to have one of these things, and how to handle that a little bit more cleanly. So I would like the League of Cities to end up paying for that insurance trust for that case. Here, Reno, I see you got your hand up.
Hey, Graham, if you have an individual that uses a lot of profanity and stuff and very derogatory, personal attacks, whatever, and responding, what actions does a township have available to them as far as not containing that information on their Facebook or on their website?
So there are a couple of options. I think that's the $1 million question, and I think this case doesn't help us at all with that. The the big picture is assuming that we are maintaining a Facebook page, something like that, and we've got the kind of commenting system. So what we would recommend as the Matt legal department is like, look, if you put up a web page, if you put up your Facebook page, just disable comments because so long as there isn't that two-way communication, you cannot get in trouble for this public forum type of argument. Now, if you've gone ahead and you have one, you have to be careful. You can't necessarily just close it. But the thing that we would recommend, the next step, sort of like the step up the risk ladder, is you start posting some public, some neutral, and some easy to apply rules on how you are going to handle this thing. Now, unfortunately, we don't get to just say no profanity. There's a famous Facebook case, excuse me, one of those mornings. There's a famous U.S. Supreme Court case about profanity and how it is potentially protected. However, so this one was it was a case back during the Vietnam War days, and there was an individual who was wearing a jacket that, if I recall correctly, said "F the draft" or "F the war," something like that. And he wore it to a courthouse, and they arrested him, charged him with disorderly conduct, took it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and this particular individual won. Now, I think there is a big difference potentially between somebody who's saying F political concept or F, an abstraction, and F you individually. I think you probably can regulate directly abusive language under the fighting words exception to First Amendment documents. So under the fighting words exception to First Amendment doctrine. So if somebody's being abusive or profane to another person, that I think you're on fairly strong ground to delete or remove. Just as the same, think of it like your town meeting, right? Or like a board meeting. If you allow public comment, it's one thing to allow somebody to be very colorful and aggressive about the way they talk about a town policy. It's another thing to allow them to get up and swear at another identifiable person. Now, there's a further wrinkle in this that as a public official, we have to have thicker skin around this stuff, unfortunately. So if they are swearing at us personally, the next question becomes, is it disrupting the business of the township? And there it's fairly, I would say, so long as you've got a good empirical basis to say that that's true, then you can call them disorderly and you can sort of walk through the steps of that analysis, and you can potentially ask them to leave. If they don't leave, you can call law enforcement and you can ask them to either trespass this person or potentially ask for a disorderly conduct charge. So I would sort of analogize a Facebook page to that. It's a very long-winded answer, but I hope that was helpful. All right.
Thanks, Graham.
How are townships making sure all the residents are receiving information, website, newspaper, bulletin board, code red newsletter? We sent out postcards, 770 of them, and residents state they did not know about topic city versus township. Yeah, It's a perennial issue, and this is one of the big reasons that I see folks choosing to put up a Facebook page or a website, just because that is the easiest way to get people information these days. People just don't pay attention to the mail anymore. They don't really pay attention to the paper anymore. People use this. This is where people's attention is. So it is certainly an effective way to get more notifications out, but it carries with it inherently these extra risks. Now, those risks can be mitigated sort of in the ways that we were talking about. And the old recommendations still apply here. If you don't allow comments, if you don't allow that two-way communication, then you very clearly do not have a public forum. And so they wouldn't have a leg to stand on, even if you're doing an official township Facebook page. Now, this case does give us a little bit of a leeway um, around some of these obstacles, if you want to put it that way. So you could, through your private page, potentially do what Mr. Freed did and just say, "Hey, look, for my neighbors, this is my personal page, but for my neighbors, I am echoing this announcement. Please, I am linking to the actual township website here to let you know about township news." And that is something that Mr. Freed did, and Mr. Freed was found to not be acting in a public capacity when he did so. So we've got more leeway than we used to think we had. So it's one strategy you potentially can take. Personally, I kind of like the no comment thing, because that's, I'm God forgive me, I'm an attorney and I don't like risk, right? But it is, at the end of the day, it's a series of risks that until the Supreme Court kind of finishes litigating out this whole area, which I think is going to take quite a while. I mean, these problems are going to keep bubbling up in different forms and different formats, and we're going to keep getting more and more detailed answers. But right now, this stuff is a little bit of a question mark. Okay, different topic. Payroll checks with the new ESST part on them. Do we need to keep the bottom half or give all to the employee? Also, how do we set up the first quarter ESST amounts? Having horrible time putting in the first quarter, so would it be okay to start in the second quarter? Well, I think we are probably stuck with doing this sooner rather than later. Now, my recollection is that that law went into effect January 1st of this year, and at that point, we were obligated to be tracking this stuff and to be giving it to folks, particularly if they ask for it. So I think, I mean, if you're making a good faith effort to get yourself into compliance, that counts, and it's something that you should absolutely document. But strictly speaking, the legislation went into effect in January, and so we are kind of well, we're bound by it. We're all bound by it. And then in terms of what part of the check we're giving to the folks, so we need to be keeping our own documentation and we need to be providing them with documentation, but the actual physical check, the law doesn't say much about that sort of thing. It just says we need to keep documentation, whatever that means. So if you've got, whatever payroll program you're using, if that's in it, you have to be able to keep it. You have to be able to show somebody it if they ask for it, and you also have to be disclosing this to them. So the physical details of what part of the check you end up giving to them, I think is left up to your discretion. I think you get to choose. We send out an annual newsletter, but no, a lot of those go straight in recycling. How do we sell old equipment or get rid of old equipment? So this is an interesting topic. So actually, the municipal contracting law, the MCL, applies not just to purchases. We always think in terms of purchases. I always think in terms of purchases, but it also applies to sales. So strictly speaking, it's the same levels. If it's below $25,000, it's kind of the Wild West. If it's that 25 to 175, then strictly speaking, you're supposed to get 2 written quotes. And above 175, you're supposed to go through a full sealed bid process on the selling side. Now, there is a neat little exception when you're selling that I always like to tell folks about, because I think that it defangs a lot of the potential problems here. And that is, let me call up the statute here, if you don't mind. 5. And let me go ahead and share my screen. Oops. Here we go. Oops. Technology making my life easier. Okay. This is the one I had in mind. Notwithstanding any other procedural requirements of the municipal contracting law, municipality may contract to sell supplies, materials, and equipment which is surplus, obsolete, or unused using an electronic selling process in which purchasers compete to purchase the supplies at the highest purchase price in an open and interactive environment. So basically, the rule is you get to use eBay if you want to use eBay, and that's okay. Now, you do have to be a little bit careful because there are also rules about who the materials can go to. And so if there is a risk of another public official, particularly somebody who is involved in the selling process, getting these things, that's a different matter. There is potentially, there are some pretty serious prohibitions related to buying stuff when you are the one who's putting it out for auction this way. They're misdemeanors potentially. So you want to be careful about that. But so long as you're just putting it up on eBay and whoever gives you the highest bid is the one who gets it, and so long as it's not going to somebody who's doing the selling, you're pretty much clear under that. Where can I look for information on posting example ballots? We just received revised ones today. Now, I don't happen to know if we've got a good resource on that in our information library. That would be the first place that I would check. But certainly giving Lori Stalker a call, she's a good resource for that kind of thing, and can kind of talk you through the issue. So, okay. All right, folks. Well, does anybody have any candidate filing pages? Same as 2022. Are we talking about the affidavit of candidacy here? Township supervisors, November election. Yes. Thank you, Chris. That's a good link to the Secretary of State's website. They have a lot of good resources for folks managing elections. I consult with them pretty often whenever an election question comes up. They are sort of the keepers of a lot of this law and know it pretty well. So they tend to have some pretty good resources there. Does anybody have any other questions here? All right. Well, in any event, thank you very much for your time and for your attention. I hope you guys found it interesting. Please feel free to give me a call, shoot me an email if you got any other questions. Otherwise, thanks very much and have a good morning.